I'm Stella, 32, a financial analyst who clawed my way up from nothing. Tonight was supposed to be my celebration, my hard-earned promotion surrounded by family. Instead, I'm sitting alone at Azuro staring at empty chairs and full appetizer plates. My phone buzzes with my mother's text. "You're not exactly a priority right now." 2 hours later, my cousin's Instagram post appears. Family night out for the real success story. It's my brother with a new jet ski. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're viewing from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible to the people who should see you most. Have you ever been overlooked by family? Let me know in the comments below. Growing up in Chicago's Ravenswood neighborhood, I learned early that my place in our family hierarchy was firmly below my younger brother Kyle. Our modest two-story home on Levitt Street had 4 bedrooms. My parents, Martha and Richard, in the master Kyle, in the second largest with the bay window, me in the smallest room that had once been a sewing space, and a guest room that somehow always had better furniture than mine. From kindergarten award ceremonies to high school graduations, the pattern was consistent. My achievements were acknowledged with distracted nods, while Kyle's mediocre accomplishments warranted elaborate celebrations. When I made honor roll every semester of high school, my mother would say, "That's nice, dear," without looking up from her magazine. When Kyle got a B- in algebra after nearly failing, my parents took the entire family out for steak dinners and bought him a new gaming system. "Kyle just needs more encouragement," my mother would explain whenever I questioned the disparity. "You've always been so independent, Stella. You don't need the validation like he does." Independent wasn't quite right. I had simply learned that waiting for my parents' approval was futile. While Kyle was coddled through every minor setback, I was expected to handle disappointments with stoic maturity. "You're the oldest," my father would remind me, as if 2 years and 10 months granted me some magical ability to need less love and support. Despite being academically gifted, his IQ test in 4th grade had apparently placed him in the near genius range, a fact my mother mentioned at every family gathering until I left for college. Kyle struggled with follow-through. He would start projects with enthusiasm, but abandon them when they required sustained effort. His bedroom was a graveyard of half-finished models, partially learned instruments, and sports equipment used twice before being relegated to the closet. Meanwhile, I worked after-school jobs from age 16, saved for college, and maintained both strong grades and extracurricular activities. I wasn't perfect by any means, but I was responsible, determined, and focused on building a stable future. These qualities, rather than being celebrated, were simply expected. Our extended family fell into the same patterns established by my parents. My Uncle Dave and Aunt Karen, my mother's brother and sister-in-law, had 2 children, my cousins Jessica and Tyler, who were close to our ages. Family gatherings at their spacious Evanston home typically devolved into the Kyle Show, with everyone gathering to hear about his latest interests while I helped in the kitchen or sat politely on the periphery. Jessica, 2 years younger than me, occasionally whispered her observations about the family's obvious favoritism, but neither of us had the courage to challenge the established dynamic. "It's weird how they all orbit around Kyle," she once said, as we watched him hold court during Thanksgiving dinner when he was 17. "You literally just got accepted to Northwestern and no one's even asked you about it." I'd shrugged and passed her the mashed potatoes. "I'm used to it." Everything changed during my senior year of college. My father, who had always seemed invincible despite his heavy smoking and resistance to regular checkups, had a massive heart attack while shoveling snow from our driveway. By the time I made it to the hospital from campus, he was gone. At 22, I found myself the steadiest presence in a family suddenly adrift. My mother, who had been a stay-at-home parent since Kyle was born, had no career skills and limited work experience. My father's life insurance covered the funeral expenses and provided some cushion, but it wasn't enough for long-term security. The mortgage on their house refinanced to pay for Kyle's first attempt at college was substantial. I put my plans for graduate school on hold and took the first decent-paying job I could find in financial services, an administrative position that at least related to my business degree. During the day, I processed paperwork and answered phones. At night, I took online courses to earn additional certifications that would make me more valuable in the industry. Kyle, then 19, dropped out of community college during his second semester, claiming the classes weren't challenging enough for someone with his intellect. He moved back home ostensibly to support our mother through her grief, but primarily spent his days playing video games and his nights hanging out with friends. His occasional part-time jobs never lasted more than a few months. "He's still finding himself," my mother would say defensively, whenever I suggested that perhaps Kyle should contribute more to the household expenses. "Your brother processes grief differently than you do, Stella. Not everyone can just push through like you." So I pushed through alone, taking on increasingly demanding roles in my company while sending my mother money each month to help with utilities, groceries, and eventually portions of the mortgage payment. What began as temporary assistance evolved into a decade-long obligation that I never questioned. They were family after all. When I was 29, my mother called in tears. The bank had sent a foreclosure warning after she'd fallen behind on mortgage payments. Without consulting me, she and Kyle had used the money I'd been sending for home repairs, a new entertainment system for the living room. Kyle's third attempt at college abandoned after 5 weeks and a necessary vacation to Florida because, as my mother explained, we've been through so much stress. Rather than let them lose the house, I agreed to make the full mortgage payment directly to the bank each month. The $1,940 monthly obligation strained my budget significantly, delaying my own financial goals, like buying a condo or building substantial retirement savings. But the alternative, letting my mother become homeless while I had the means to prevent it, seemed impossible. "It's just until Kyle gets established in his career," my mother promised. "He has so much potential. Once he finds the right opportunity, he'll take over, and you can focus on your own life." 3 years passed. Kyle, now 29, had cycled through various opportunities, including a short-lived podcast about cryptocurrency, a multi-level marketing scheme selling protein supplements, and a business partnership with a friend that primarily involved reselling limited edition sneakers online. None generated consistent income, but each failure was cushioned by my continued financial support of our mother, which indirectly supported him. Throughout it all, I built my career methodically, working 60-hour weeks, taking on the projects no one else wanted, and gradually earning a reputation as someone who could handle complex challenges. I remained in my small one-bedroom apartment, drove a 10-year-old Honda, and limited my social life to afford the mortgage payments that weren't my responsibility, but had become my burden. The irony wasn't lost on me. The child who had been raised to be independent was now the foundation upon which the rest of the family depended, even as they continued to celebrate Kyle's potential over my actual achievements. After a decade in financial services, I'd worked my way up from administrative assistant to junior analyst and then to financial analyst. Each promotion came after years of extra effort, additional certifications obtained on my own time, and consistently exceeding performance metrics. Unlike some of my colleagues who had family connections or prestigious MBA programs on their resumes, my advancement relied solely on results and reputation. The email from Human Resources had arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, requesting a meeting with the department director the following morning. My stomach had knotted with anxiety, and our industry unscheduled meetings often meant restructuring or layoffs. I'd spent the evening updating my resume and checking job boards just in case. Instead, Director Patel had smiled warmly as I entered his office. "Stella, I'll get right to the point. We're promoting you to Senior Financial Analyst effective next month. Your work on the Richardson portfolio was exceptional, and the executive team has taken notice." The promotion came with a 45% salary increase, access to the executive floor, and a team of junior analysts to supervise. It represented everything I'd been working toward: recognition, financial security, and the opportunity to shape bigger projects. "This is incredible," I'd managed to say, trying to maintain professional composure while internally screaming with joy. "Thank you for this opportunity. I won't let you down." "You've earned it," Director Patel had replied. "Take someone special out to celebrate. The company will cover dinner up to $500, just send me the receipt." Someone special. The phrase had echoed in my mind as I walked back to my cubicle. Despite my professional success, my personal life had taken a back seat to work demands and family obligations. There was no romantic partner to celebrate with, and my few close friends had scattered across the country pursuing their own careers. But there was my family. Despite everything, I still craved their recognition, their acknowledgement that my hard work and sacrifices mattered. This promotion, significant enough to impress even my achievement-blind relatives, seemed like the perfect opportunity to finally receive the validation I'd been seeking for years. That evening, I'd called my mother to share the news. "That's wonderful, honey," she'd said, sounding genuinely pleased. "We should celebrate." Her enthusiasm had fueled my hopes. Perhaps this achievement, senior management at 32 in a competitive field, was finally substantial enough to warrant real recognition. "Actually," I'd replied, "my company is paying for a celebration dinner. I'd like to take everyone out, you, Kyle, Uncle Dave, and Aunt Karen, Jessica, and Tyler, too. Somewhere really nice." "Oh, Stella, that's so generous. Everyone will be thrilled. Just tell us when and where." I'd spent hours researching the perfect restaurant, finally settling on Azzurro, an upscale Italian place downtown, with handmade pasta and a wine list that had been featured in Food and Wine magazine. The white tablecloths, attentive service, and elegant atmosphere seemed appropriate for marking such a significant milestone. 2 weeks in advance, I'd made a reservation for 7 people at 7 o'clock on Friday evening. I'd sent everyone formal invitations via email, complete with details about the restaurant, the occasion, and how much their presence would mean to me. One by one, they'd all confirmed, my mother with multiple exclamation points, Kyle with a casual, "Sure thing," Uncle Dave and Aunt Karen with congratulatory messages, and my cousins with emojis expressing excitement. The anticipation had built throughout the intervening weeks. I'd splurged on a navy blue sheath dress from Nordstrom that cost more than I'd ever spent on a single item of clothing. I'd scheduled a professional blowout and makeup application for the first time since my college graduation. I'd even bought new heels, practicing walking in them around my apartment to avoid any embarrassing stumbles. Friday had finally arrived. I'd left work early to prepare my colleagues, offering congratulations and good wishes as I departed. The salon visits had gone perfectly. My usually unruly brown hair transformed into sleek waves, my minimal makeup routine elevated to something polished yet natural. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized the confident, sophisticated woman staring back at me. I'd arrived at Azzurro 30 minutes early, wanting to ensure everything was perfect. The maitre d' had shown me to the best table in the restaurant, a round booth near the windows, with a view of the Chicago River slightly removed from other diners to allow for conversation. "Your guests haven't arrived yet," he'd observed as he pulled out my chair. "They'll be here soon," I'd assured him, smoothing my dress as I sat down. "Should I order some appetizers for the table while I wait?" He'd recommended several options, and I'd selected an assortment: bruschetta, arancini, calamari, and an antipasto platter. I'd also ordered a bottle of Prosecco to be opened when everyone arrived. The splurge felt appropriate. After all, this was the celebration of a lifetime achievement that had been 10 years in the making. At 7 o'clock, the appetizers had arrived, beautifully arranged on elegant white platters. The restaurant had begun filling with other diners, couples leaning toward each other over candlelight, business associates in expensive suits, families celebrating special occasions. But my table remained conspicuously empty, except for me. At 7:15, I'd sent a group text. "At Azzurro, table is ready and appetizers are here. Can't wait to see you all." By 7:30, the maitre d' had stopped by to ask if I wanted to begin with a drink while waiting. I'd ordered a glass of Pinot Grigio, still optimistic that my family was simply running late. Chicago traffic could be unpredictable after all. At 7:45, Jessica had finally texted, "So sorry, something came up. Don't think I can make it tonight. Congrats again." No explanation of what had come up. No offer to reschedule. By 8 o'clock, the waitstaff had begun exchanging concerned glances as they passed my table. The appetizers remained largely untouched. I'd managed a few bites of bruschetta, but found my appetite diminishing as the minutes ticked by. Uncle Dave's text had arrived at 8:15. "Car trouble. Won't be able to make it. Rain check." I'd stared at my phone, suspicion growing. 2 last-minute cancellations seemed unlikely. I'd tried calling my mother, but the call had gone straight to voicemail. Kyle's phone had rung several times before disconnecting. At 8:30, as I sat alone at a table for 7, surrounded by cooling appetizers and pitying glances from nearby diners, my phone had finally buzzed with a text from my mother. "Sorry, honey, you're not exactly a priority right now. Kyle needs us." The words had hit like a physical blow, the casual cruelty of them stealing my breath. Not exactly a priority. 5 words that summarized our entire family dynamic, now explicitly stated rather than implicitly demonstrated. As I'd struggled to process this rejection, another notification had appeared, an Instagram alert that my cousin Tyler had tagged me in a post. Numb with dread, I'd opened the app to find a series of photos posted just minutes earlier. The first showed my entire invited family, my mother Kyle, Uncle Dave, Aunt Karen, Jessica, and Tyler gathered around a table at Lakefront Marina restaurant raising glasses in a toast. The location was time-stamped just 20 minutes earlier. The second photo featured Kyle standing proudly next to a brand new jet ski, his arms slung around my mother's shoulders as she beamed with obvious pride. The caption read, "Family night out for the real success story. Congrats to @KyleTheGuy on the new summer ride. #family. First, #real achievements. #lake life." I'd stared at my phone screen, the restaurant around me fading into background noise as the full picture became horrifyingly clear. My family hadn't experienced car trouble or last-minute emergencies. They had collectively decided that Kyle's impulse purchase of a recreational vehicle was more worthy of celebration than my career achievement, the promotion I'd worked toward for a decade, the financial stability I'd sacrificed to support them, the milestone I'd been eager to share. The waitress had approached cautiously, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Will your party still be joining you, miss?" I'd looked up at her, suddenly aware of the tears threatening to spill onto my carefully applied makeup. "No," I'd replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "They won't be coming." The waitress Amber, according to her name tag, had hesitated beside my table, compassion evident in her expression. "Would you like me to clear some of these appetizers or pack them to go?" I'd glanced at the lavish spread food that would have been eagerly devoured by the family who had chosen to celebrate elsewhere. Something shifted inside me at that moment, a hardening, a resolve, a decision that had been years in the making without my conscious awareness. "Actually," I'd said, straightening my shoulders, "I'd like to see the dinner menu. I'm still going to have my celebration." Surprise had flickered across Amber's face, quickly replaced by approval. "Good for you. Our chef's special tonight is a black truffle risotto with seared scallops." "It's exceptional." "That sounds perfect. And I'll take your most expensive bottle of red wine." The small act of defiance, choosing to stay to occupy the space I'd reserved to celebrate myself when no one else would, had felt like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. As Amber had walked away to place my order, I'd pulled out my phone again, staring at the Instagram photos that had shattered my illusions about my place in my family's priorities. The jet ski gleamed in the marina's lights, probably costing around $15,000 based on the model. My brother's arm was draped possessively over it, his expression triumphant. My mother stood beside him, her pride unmistakable, the same expression I'd hoped to see directed at me tonight. I'd scrolled through the comments under the post, "Way to go, Kyle living the dream," from Uncle Dave. "So proud of you, sweetie. You deserve this," from my mother. "Can't wait to ride it this weekend," from Jessica, who apparently hadn't had something come up after all. Each comment had twisted the knife deeper. As I'd continued scrolling through my family's social media, a pattern had emerged: dozens of celebratory posts about Kyle's minor accomplishments over the years, while my milestones went unmentioned. My college graduation had warranted a single photo. Kyle's brief stint as a bartender had generated an entire album titled "Our Entrepreneur." The risotto had arrived, steam rising from the perfectly presented dish. I'd taken a bite, the rich flavors barely registering through my emotional numbness. The wine, a $350 bottle of Barolo that I would never have ordered under normal circumstances, had been decanted and poured with ceremony. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" the server had asked. "It's delicious," I'd replied automatically, though I could barely taste it through the lump in my throat. As I'd continued my solitary meal, I'd begun mentally calculating the financial support I'd provided to my family over the years. The mortgage payments alone, $1,940 monthly for 3 years, totaled nearly $70,000. Add in the utilities, groceries, car insurance, and miscellaneous expenses I'd covered, and the figure approached six figures. Money that could have gone toward my own home instead of maintaining my mother's. Money that indirectly supported Kyle's lifestyle of minimal responsibility and maximum entitlement. Money that I'd given freely out of love and obligation, never receiving so much as genuine gratitude in return. My phone had buzzed again with a text from my mother. Kyle needs to insure the jet ski. Can you send an extra $500 this month? We'll pay you back soon. The audacity had been breathtaking. Not only had they abandoned my celebration for Kyle's, but they expected me to finance his new toy as well. No acknowledgement of their absence tonight. No apology for the explicit statement that I wasn't a priority. Just another financial demand. Something had broken inside me then, or perhaps it had finally healed. The fog of familial obligation that had clouded my judgment for years had lifted, revealing the stark reality of our relationship. I wasn't a daughter or sister to them. I was an ATM with an emotional attachment they occasionally acknowledged when it served their needs. I'd finished my meal with deliberate slowness, savoring each bite of the dessert I'd ordered, a tiramisu that cost $22. When the bill had arrived, I'd looked at the total without flinching, $1,940 with the generous tip I'd added for Amber. The exact amount of my monthly mortgage payment to my mother's bank account. The symmetry had seemed fitting. The drive home had passed in a blur of streetlights and radio music I couldn't quite hear over the thoughts racing through my mind. By the time I'd reached my apartment, a calm determination had replaced the initial hurt and anger. I'd known exactly what I needed to do. Sitting at my small dining table, still wearing my expensive new dress, I'd opened my laptop and navigated to my online banking portal. With 3 clicks, I'd canceled the automatic monthly payment to my mother's mortgage account. The confirmation screen had asked if I was sure. I'd never been more certain of anything in my life as I clicked yes. Next, I'd opened a spreadsheet and documented every payment I'd made to support my family over the past decade. Dates, amounts, purposes. It had taken hours combing through years of bank statements and credit card bills, but the resulting document provided irrefutable evidence of my financial contributions. I'd saved it, printed a copy, and emailed it to myself for safekeeping. Then I'd written a letter, clear, concise, and devoid of the emotional pleading that had characterized so many of my previous attempts to establish healthier family dynamics. Mom, I've canceled the automatic mortgage payment effective immediately. After 3 years of paying $1,940 monthly toward a house I don't live in while being treated as not exactly a priority, I've decided to prioritize myself. The money I've been sending could have purchased several jet skis or a down payment on my own home. Instead, it's subsidized your lifestyle and Kyle's continued dependence. This arrangement ends now. I've attached documentation of my financial contributions over the past decade for your records and mine. Kyle is 29 years old. Let him pay the mortgage. Let him be the support you've always believed he could be. Let him show his potential through actions rather than promises. I love you, but I can no longer enable a dynamic that diminishes my worth while celebrating his minimal efforts. Stella. At 1 a.m, I'd driven to my mother's house in the suburbs, the letter sealed in an envelope. I'd written, "Let him pay it," on the outside before slipping it under the door knocker. The house had been dark except for the blue flicker of the television in Kyle's basement room. As I'd driven away, my phone had begun buzzing with incoming calls, my mother likely having received a notification from the bank about the canceled payment. I'd silenced the ringer without answering. Back in my apartment, I'd changed out of my dress, carefully hanging it in my closet, a memento of the night everything changed. I'd removed my makeup, let down my professional hairstyle, and stood looking at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. For the first time in years, I'd recognized myself, not just the exterior, but the woman looking back at me from the glass. Strong. Worthy. No longer diminished by others' estimations of my value. I'd turned off my phone completely before going to bed, knowing the barrage of calls and messages would only intensify once my letter was discovered in the morning. For the first time since my father's death, I'd slept deeply and dreamlessly unburdened by the weight of obligations that had never been mine to carry. When I'd turned my phone back on at 7:30 the next morning, the screen had lit up with notifications, 81 missed calls, 47 text messages, and 23 voicemails. The digital avalanche of panic from my family had been exactly what I'd expected: urgent, accusatory, and entirely focused on how my decision affected them rather than why I'd made it. The first several voicemails from my mother had progressed from confusion to anger to tearful pleading. "Stella, the bank sent a notification about the mortgage payment. Call me back immediately. I found your letter. This is completely irresponsible. You can't just stop payments without warning. Please call me back, honey. We need to talk about this. I'm sure we can work something out. How could you do this to your own mother, after everything I've done for you?" Kyle's messages had been predictably self-centered. "WTF, sis, mom's freaking out about the mortgage. Fix this. You're being super selfish right now. Family is supposed to help each other. Mom says you're just jealous about my jet ski. Real mature." Even Uncle Dave and Aunt Karen had joined the chorus, their messages oscillating between guilt-tripping and attempts at mediation. Only Jessica's text had struck a different note. "I'm sorry about last night. You didn't deserve that. They're all freaking out this morning, but honestly, I get it. Call me if you want to talk." I'd silenced my phone again and prepared for work, taking extra care with my appearance. This was, after all, my first day knowing I would be senior financial analyst Stella Anders, no longer defined by family obligations that drained my resources and diminished my achievements. At the office, I'd closed my door, a new perk of the promotion, and called a locksmith to change the locks on my apartment that afternoon. Then I'd contacted my service provider to get a new phone number effective immediately. I'd created a new email address for personal correspondence separate from the one my family had. These practical steps toward separation had felt like building a moat around the castle of my self-respect, not to keep everyone out permanently, but to ensure that future access would be on my terms through drawbridges I controlled. By lunchtime, the missed calls had increased to over 100. I'd finally texted my mother, "I'm not discussing this over the phone. I'll meet you at Cornerstone Coffee on Sunday at 2 p.m. if you want to talk in person." 3 days of distance seemed necessary to ensure I wouldn't backslide into my habitual role of family fixer. Sunday would give all of us time to process the magnitude of the change I'd initiated. My mother had responded immediately. "We need to resolve this now. The mortgage is due in 10 days. That's not my problem anymore," I'd replied, then silenced notifications from her number. The weekend had passed in a blur of self-care activities. I'd rarely allowed myself time for a long hike along the lakeshore, a massage at a day spa, browsing bookstores without checking the time, preparing elaborate meals just for me. I'd ignored the continued attempts at contact from my family, focusing instead on rediscovering who I was outside of their expectations and demands. Sunday afternoon had arrived with a mix of dread and determination. I'd arrived at Cornerstone Coffee 15 minutes early, choosing a table in the corner with a clear view of the entrance. I'd ordered a simple black coffee, needing the clarity of bitter caffeine for the conversation ahead. My mother had entered precisely at 2, her eyes darting around until she spotted me. She wasn't alone. Kyle trailed behind her, looking sullen. I'd specified that I wanted to speak with her, but the fact that she'd brought my brother as reinforcement hadn't surprised me. She'd always believed in strength in numbers, especially when those numbers included her golden child. "Stella," she'd begun as they slid into the seats across from me, her voice a forced calm that didn't match her anxious expression. "This has gone on long enough. We need to sort this out like adults." "That's why I'm here," I'd replied evenly. Kyle had jumped in immediately. "You can't just cut Mom off like this. The bank called yesterday about the late payment. They're threatening late fees." "Lower your voice," I'd said, noticing other patrons glancing our way. "And yes, I can just cut Mom off. I've been making payments on a house I don't live in for 3 years. That ends now." "But your brother needs," my mother had started. "Kyle is 29 years old." I'd interrupted, the words from my letter repeated aloud with firm conviction. "He has a college degree, even if he didn't finish. He's capable of working. If he wants to buy jet skis, he can pay the mortgage." "That's not fair," Kyle had protested. I'm building my brand right now. You know, entrepreneurship takes time to become profitable. And what exactly is your brand this month? I'd asked. Last I heard you were reselling sneakers online. Before that, it was cryptocurrency. Before that, protein shakes. None of which seemed to generate enough income for basic living expenses, let alone luxury purchases. My mother had placed a restraining hand on Kyle's arm as he'd opened his mouth to retort. Stella, honey, I know you're upset about missing your dinner. We should have handled that better. But punishing us financially because your feelings were hurt is extreme. The characterization of my decision as emotional rather than rational had been so predictable that I'd almost laughed. My entire life, any time I'd expressed legitimate concerns, they'd been dismissed as feelings rather than acknowledged as valid observations. This isn't about the dinner, I'd said, though that had certainly been the catalyst. This is about a decade of financial support with zero appreciation. This is about working 60-hour weeks to support 2 households while Kyle plays at being an entrepreneur. This is about being told explicitly that I'm not exactly a priority, while simultaneously being expected to bankroll everyone's priorities but my own. I didn't mean it like that. My mother had backpedaled. I was just stressed because Kyle needed help with the jet ski paperwork. You meant exactly what you said, I'd countered. And it was merely the honest version of what your actions have been saying for years. Kyle had slouched in his chair, the petulant expression I recognized from childhood firmly in place. So what, you're just abandoning your family? Dad would be so disappointed in you. The invocation of our father, his ultimate trump card, had hit its mark, but not in the way he'd intended. Rather than guilting me into compliance, it had crystallized my resolve. Dad worked hard every day of his life to support his family. I'd said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to crack it. He would be disappointed, all right. Disappointed that his son expects handouts instead of earning his way. Disappointed that his wife enables dependence instead of encouraging growth. Disappointed that his daughter has been treated as nothing more than a convenient source of funds. My mother's face had paled. That's not true. We love you, Stella. You've always been so capable. So independent. Independent by necessity, not by nature, I'd clarified. And being capable doesn't mean I deserve less consideration or appreciation. We'd continued talking in circles for nearly an hour, my mother alternating between tearful appeals to family loyalty and thinly veiled accusations of selfishness. Kyle had vacillated between angry outbursts and sullen silence. Neither had acknowledged the fundamental issue that they had consistently prioritized his wants over my needs while expecting me to finance both. Here's what's going to happen, I'd finally said, placing both palms flat on the table. I'm not resuming mortgage payments. Ever. That chapter is closed. I've changed my phone number, my email, and my locks. I need space to reevaluate what kind of relationship I want with both of you going forward. But the mortgage, my mother had begun, is not my responsibility, I'd finished firmly. You have options. Kyle can get a real job and contribute. You can sell the house and downsize. You can rent out the spare rooms. But whatever you decide, it will be without my financial input. And if we lose the house, Kyle had challenged. If Mom ends up homeless, could you live with yourself? The emotional blackmail was so transparent, it had almost been comical. You won't be homeless. You'll just have to live within your means like most adults do. And yes, I can absolutely live with prioritizing my financial health after a decade of prioritizing yours. As I'd stood to leave, my mother had grabbed my wrist. Please, Stella. Just until Kyle's next business idea takes off. He's so close to a breakthrough. The desperate belief in her eyes, that perpetual faith that Kyle's potential would eventually materialize into tangible success, had been simultaneously sad and infuriating. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I hope his jet ski business is profitable, I'd said. I'll be in touch when I'm ready, not before. Walking away from that coffee shop had felt like stepping out of a fog into clear sunshine. The guilt and obligation that had clouded my decision-making for so long had finally lifted, allowing me to see the path forward with unprecedented clarity. That evening, as I'd sat in my apartment with my new locks and new phone number, I'd received a text from Jessica on my work phone, the only number she could still reach me at. I heard about the meeting today. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. They've taken advantage of you for years. Let me know if you want to get coffee sometime, just us. It was a small affirmation, but significant proof that not everyone in my family ecosystem viewed my decision as a betrayal rather than a long overdue boundary. Before going to bed, I'd opened my banking app and set up an automatic transfer, $1,940 monthly, the exact amount of the mortgage payment I'd been making now directed into my own savings account earmarked for future home down payment. For the first time in years, I'd fallen asleep thinking about my own future rather than worrying about supporting everyone else's. 3 months after setting boundaries with my family, I barely recognized my own life. The immediate changes had been practical. A new phone number, new email address, and new locks had created the physical separation I needed to maintain my resolve. But the internal shifts had been even more profound. Without the constant drain of family drama and financial obligation, I'd discovered an unexpected abundance of energy and focus. At work, this translated into a level of performance that had caught the attention of senior leadership. Just 6 weeks after my promotion to senior financial analyst, I'd been offered an additional opportunity leading a special project team, developing investment strategies for sustainable energy portfolios. Your clarity of thought and decisiveness have been exceptional lately, Director Patel had commented during our weekly check-in. Whatever changes you've made in your personal life, they're reflecting positively in your professional performance. He'd been right. Without constant texts from my mother about household emergencies or Kyle's latest financial crisis, I could fully engage with complex financial models. Without the perpetual background anxiety about supporting 2 households, my creativity and risk assessment had sharpened. Without exhausting myself maintaining others' lives, I'd found the bandwidth to advance my own career with renewed vigor. My personal life had transformed as well. I'd moved from my cramped 1-bedroom apartment to a light-filled condo in downtown Chicago with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, a place I could never have afforded while making my mother's mortgage payments. The condo wasn't large, but it was mine in every sense, decorated to my taste, organized according to my preferences, a sanctuary free from others' expectations or demands. Through Jessica, I'd learned bits of information about my mother and Kyle's situation. The mortgage had indeed gone unpaid, resulting in a formal warning from the bank. Kyle's jet ski had been repossessed after just 2 months when the loan payments weren't made. My mother had been forced to return to work for the first time in nearly 30 years, taking a position as an administrative assistant at a local insurance office. Kyle's freaking out, Jessica had told me over coffee one Saturday. He actually had to get a real job at Target. He keeps telling everyone it's just temporary until his next venture takes off, but Mom can't cover all the bills herself. How's she doing? I'd asked, surprised to find I could still care about the answer without feeling responsible for the solution. Struggling but managing. Uncle Dave helped her refinance the mortgage to lower the payments. She had to cancel her country club membership and sell some jewelry, but they're not in immediate danger of losing the house. The news had brought a complex mix of emotions: concern for my mother's well-being, satisfaction that my brother was finally experiencing consequences, relief that other family members had stepped up rather than expecting me to continue carrying the entire burden. She asks about you, Jessica had added cautiously. Wants to know if you're okay. I'm better than okay, I'd replied honestly. I'm thriving. And I was. Without the weight of unhealthy family dynamics dragging me down, I'd rediscovered parts of myself that had been dormant for years. I'd joined a hiking group that explored trails around the Great Lakes region on weekends. I'd started taking cooking classes focused on international cuisines. I'd even begun dating again, meeting interesting people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. The most significant change, however, had been internal, a fundamental shift in how I perceived my own worth. For so long, I'd believed I needed to earn love through sacrifice and service, that my value was measured by how much I could give rather than any inherent deservingness. Breaking free from that pattern had allowed me to recognize my own inherent value, separate from what I could do for others. 2 months into my family estrangement, I'd received a letter from my mother, a real letter handwritten on stationery, rather than a text or email. Jessica had delivered it during one of our coffee meetups, explaining that our mother had asked her to pass it along since she no longer had my current contact information. I'd set the envelope aside for several days, not quite ready to engage with whatever it contained. When I'd finally opened it on a quiet Sunday morning, the contents had surprised me. Dear Stella, I've written and rewritten this letter a dozen times searching for the right words. There probably aren't any that could adequately address the years of hurt I've caused you. These past months without your support, both emotional and financial, have been difficult but clarifying. I've had to face some hard truths about myself as a mother, about the dynamics I've enabled between you and Kyle, about the unfair expectations I've placed on you since your father died. The mortgage payment was never your responsibility. Neither was supporting Kyle's various endeavors. You stepped up when we needed help, and instead of being grateful and working toward independence, we came to expect and depend on your sacrifice. I won't ask you to resume financial support. That chapter is closed, as you said. But I would like the opportunity someday when you're ready to rebuild a relationship based on mutual respect rather than dependence. I've started therapy to understand why I've favored Kyle so consistently at your expense. The preliminary insights have been painful but necessary. I've recognized patterns from my own childhood that I unconsciously repeated with you and your brother. Kyle is struggling to adjust to real-world expectations after years of protection from consequences. That's my failure as a parent, not yours as a sister. He's angry right now, but someday I hope he'll recognize the gift you've given him by forcing him to stand on his own feet. I miss you, Stella. Not your money, not your help, but you, your laugh, your practical wisdom, your steady presence. I understand if you're not ready to let me back into your life. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I couldn't or wouldn't see before. With love and regret, Mom. The letter had left me in tears, not from manipulation or guilt, but from the unexpected gift of genuine acknowledgement. For the first time in my adult life, my mother had really seen me as a person deserving of consideration rather than merely a resource to be tapped. I hadn't responded immediately. The wounds were still too fresh, the patterns too recently broken, to risk re-establishing contact without careful consideration. But I'd kept the letter, reading it occasionally as a reminder that growth was possible, that people could change when forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Kyle, according to Jessica's updates, had been less reflective. He'd blamed me entirely for the family's financial struggles, painting himself as the victim of my selfish betrayal. The jet ski's repossession had been particularly hard for him to accept representing, as it did the tangible loss of a status symbol he'd briefly possessed. He keeps saying he's going to make it big and show you what you're missing out on by cutting ties, Jessica had reported with an eye roll. Meanwhile, he's called in sick to Target 3 times in 2 weeks. His reaction hadn't surprised me. Kyle had never been asked to examine his role in family dynamics or take responsibility for his financial choices. Without me as a safety net, he was experiencing natural consequences for perhaps the first time in his adult life. The process would be painful, but ultimately necessary for his growth if he chose to grow rather than cling to victimhood. 3 months into my new life, I'd received another unexpected communication, a voicemail from my mother left on my work phone. Stella, it's Mom. I know you're still taking space, and I respect that. I just wanted you to know that I've picked up extra shifts at the insurance office to cover more of the bills. Kyle's moved into the basement officially and is paying nominal rent. The house is still underwater mortgage-wise, but we're managing. I hope you're well. I think of you every day. No need to call back unless you want to. The message had been different from her previous communications. No guilt, no demands, no expectations. Just information shared respectfully with recognition of the boundaries I'd established. That evening, I'd taken a significant step of my own. I'd texted Jessica from my new number with permission to share it with our mother, not Kyle, not the extended family, just my mother. It wasn't a full reopening of communication, but a small window through which a healthier relationship might eventually develop. The response had come hours later, a simple text from my mother. "Thank you for this trust. I'll honor it." 3 words that acknowledged the gravity of what had been broken and the fragility of what might be rebuilt. As fall had turned to early winter, I'd begun tentatively re-establishing contact, brief text exchanges about neutral topics, a short phone call on my birthday coffee, once at a cafe near my office. Each interaction had been carefully bounded, each free from the financial entanglements and emotional manipulation that had characterized our previous relationship. My mother had seemed different, more respectful of my time and space, more aware of her words' impact, more willing to take responsibility for her choices, rather than expecting me to fix every problem. Whether these changes would endure remained to be seen, but the effort itself represented progress I'd once thought impossible. Kyle and I remained estranged by mutual choice. According to my mother, he was still angry, still blaming me for the family's reduced circumstances. I'd made peace with his perspective. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged, especially when one party remained committed to patterns that had caused harm. Thanksgiving approached traditionally a time for family gatherings, but this year I had different plans. I'd accepted an invitation from 2 colleagues to join their Friendsgiving celebration, a potluck affair with no family drama attached. The freedom to choose my holiday companions, rather than defaulting to biological obligations, felt like another small victory in my journey toward authentic living. The night before Thanksgiving, as I'd prepared the roasted vegetable dish I'd promised to bring to the gathering, my phone had buzzed with a text from my mother. "Happy Thanksgiving, Stella. I'm grateful for the lessons of this year, painful as they've been. I'm grateful for your courage in breaking patterns that needed breaking. Most of all, I'm grateful that you're finding happiness on your own terms. You deserve that, and so much more. Love, Mom." I'd stood in my kitchen, wooden spoon in hand, tears blurring my vision as I read the message again. It wasn't a miracle cure for years of damaging dynamics. It wasn't a guarantee that old patterns wouldn't reemerge in new forms. But it was acknowledgement. It was respect. It was the beginning of a relationship based on genuine care rather than obligation and exploitation. I'd typed a response with careful honesty. "Thank you for this message. I'm grateful too for the clarity this year has brought, for the chance to rediscover myself outside of caretaking roles, for the possibility that relationships can evolve when both people are willing to grow. Happy Thanksgiving, Mom." As I'd returned to my cooking, I'd felt a sense of peace that had nothing to do with forgiveness or forgetting. The past remained unchanged, the years of unequal treatment, the financial exploitation, the emotional manipulation. But the future remained unwritten, full of possibilities I could now approach from a position of strength rather than obligation. The mortgage payments I once made now funded my retirement account and travel experiences. The energy I once spent managing family crises now nourished my own growth in relationships. The worth I once sought through sacrifice I now claimed as my birthright, requiring no justification or earning. Sometimes the bravest act of love, both for others and yourself, is walking away from dynamics that diminish your spirit. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone who has taken you for granted is the opportunity to live without your support. Sometimes the path to healing requires breaking before rebuilding can begin. As I prepared to celebrate Thanksgiving with chosen family, rather than biological relations, I felt profound gratitude for that devastating text message 3 months earlier. "You're not exactly a priority right now." Those 7 words had finally shown me the truth I'd been avoiding for years and given me permission to make myself the priority I deserved to be all along. 5 years have passed since that night at Azuro, when I sat alone at a table for 7, waiting for a family that chose a jet ski celebration over my career milestone. What initially felt like the most painful rejection of my life has transformed into the catalyst for the most significant growth I've ever experienced. My professional trajectory continued its upward path after I reclaimed my time and energy from family obligations. The sustainable energy portfolio project I led became the model for a new division within our firm, and I was promoted to Director of Sustainable Investments 2 years ago. My team has grown from 3 people to 15, and we manage over $300 million in assets focused on environmentally and socially responsible companies. The financial freedom that came from redirecting $1,940 monthly toward my own future rather than my mother's mortgage allowed me to make strategic career decisions based on long-term goals rather than immediate financial needs. When a competing firm tried to recruit me with a higher salary but less alignment with my values, I could afford to decline knowing my savings provided a buffer that previous obligations would have eliminated. My personal life flourished as well. The downtown condo became my sanctuary and then my launching pad. Last year, I purchased a 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood with a garden that's becoming my newest passion. I've built deep friendships with people who celebrate my successes without keeping score, who offer support without expecting financial compensation, who value reciprocity rather than one-sided giving. My relationship with my mother evolved gradually over these 5 years, moving through careful text exchanges to occasional phone calls to monthly lunch meetings. We'll never have the effortlessly close relationship some mothers and daughters enjoy, but we've established something perhaps more valuable, a relationship based on mutual respect and clearly defined boundaries. The therapy she mentioned in her letter continued helping her recognize patterns from her own childhood that had shaped her parenting. Her father had dramatically favored her brother, creating a blueprint she unconsciously followed with her own children. Understanding these patterns didn't excuse them, but provided context that helped us both process the past with greater compassion. "I'll always regret the years I missed appreciating you," she told me during a particularly honest conversation last Christmas. "All the achievements I downplayed, all the support I took for granted, all the times I made Kyle the center of everything." "We can't change the past," I'd replied, "but we're writing a different story now." And we are. My mother retired from the insurance office last year, downsizing from the family home to a small condo she can comfortably afford on her Social Security and modest savings. I don't contribute financially to her lifestyle, but I helped her find a reliable financial advisor to maximize her limited resources. Our relationship now exists entirely separate from money, a gift I once thought impossible. Kyle and I remain estranged by mutual choice. According to my mother, he still blames me for abandoning the family and refuses to acknowledge his role in the dynamics that led to my withdrawal. He's cycled through several more failed business ventures and jobs, still chasing the elusive big break that would validate my mother's unwavering faith in his potential. I've made peace with his absence from my life. Not every relationship can or should be preserved, especially when the patterns causing harm remain firmly in place. I wish him well from a distance, hoping someday he might gain the self-awareness that could lead to genuine connection, but no longer feeling responsible for his growth or choices. Jessica has become a true friend rather than merely a sympathetic cousin. Our shared experience of family dynamics created a foundation upon which we've built a relationship based on mutual understanding and respect. Her wedding last summer was the first family event I attended after establishing boundaries, and her decision to seat me at a friend's table, rather than with the extended family, demonstrated her commitment to supporting my healing journey. The most profound changes, however, have been internal. I no longer measure my worth by how much I can give or sacrifice for others. I no longer apologize for setting boundaries or prioritizing my well-being. I no longer accept treatment that diminishes my dignity or contributions. Financial independence became emotional independence, which in turn became the confidence to build a life aligned with my values rather than others' expectations. The freedom I've found by walking away from unhealthy dynamics has allowed me to create connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. Sometimes people ask if I regret the years I spent supporting my family financially, the missed opportunities, the delayed investments, the dreams deferred while I covered my mother's mortgage and subsidized my brother's lifestyle. I don't see those years as wasted, though. They were the lessons I needed to learn, the experiences that clarified my values and ultimately pushed me to reclaim my life when the cost became too great. The text message that broke my heart that night at Azoro, "You're not exactly a priority right now," hangs framed in my home office. Not as a reminder of rejection, but as a testament to the moment I decided to make myself a priority after a lifetime of coming last. Those 7 words, painful as they were, gave me permission to rewrite the story of my life with myself as the protagonist rather than a supporting character. For anyone watching this who recognizes themselves in my story, anyone who gives endlessly while receiving little in return, anyone whose achievements are minimized while others are celebrated, anyone who carries financial burdens that should be shared, I want you to know that walking away isn't selfish. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. Prioritizing yourself isn't wrong. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to participate in dynamics that diminish your spirit. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone who takes you for granted is the opportunity to stand on their own. Sometimes healing requires breaking before rebuilding can begin. 5 years ago, I paid a $1.940 restaurant bill and canceled a $1.940 mortgage payment in the same night. The symmetry seemed fitting, then one last contribution before reclaiming my resources for myself. Today, that same amount goes into my retirement account, monthly funding a future I once couldn't imagine while supporting others consumed my present. The family celebration I hoped for that night at Azuro never materialized. But the life celebration that began when I walked away from toxic dynamics has exceeded my wildest expectations. Sometimes the most painful rejections lead to the most necessary redirections. Sometimes not being a priority to others teaches you to become the priority to yourself. Sometimes sitting alone at a table for 7 is the first step toward finding your true place in the world. Have you ever had to walk away from people who took you for granted? How did you find the courage to put yourself first? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength through difficult experiences, and share with anyone who might need permission to prioritize themselves after years of coming last. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, you deserve to be your own priority, no matter what anyone else might say.